Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm so very grateful that you've joined us here again today. I'm Alina Dorian, the Associate Dean for Public Health Practice, as well as Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. But I've also been a school principal for 10 years. Therefore, I'm even more excited that you've joined us today for our third in a series titled Principal Practices for Safe Schools. I want to quickly take a moment to thank our collaborating partners, the UCLA School of Education and Information Studies, the California Safe Schools for All team, the California Department of Education, the Association of California School Administrators, and our California Connected Consortium, consisting of the California Department of Public Health and our academic partner, UC San Francisco. As we all know, the state's Safe Schools for All team released their new guidance on school reopening in mid-January. And under that consolidated framework, the state provided detailed guidance around their COVID-19 safety plan and its two main components, the Cal OSHA COVID-19 prevention plan and the school guidance checklist. And today, we're lucky to have with us insightful public health experts and our panel of incredible educators, esteemed school administrators, who will pose questions around exposure management within schools, talking about contact tracing, case investigation, and what that means with your relationship to your local health jurisdiction, your Department of Public Health, around all of these issues. And our hope is to create a dialogue to better inform, empower, and create confidence in the decisions we need to make to open our schools and to keep our schools safe. So we're going to begin hearing from our public health experts, and then transitioning into a Q&A from our education partners. I'll try to keep a little bit of time at the end so we can address some of your questions. Please use the Q&A button to enter your questions. And those of you that have already submitted questions, thank you so much. All of your questions and comments are very valuable in helping us design this series to truly meet your needs. So please help me now welcome our panelists, beginning with our public health experts. We're honored to have with us Ms. Evelyn Ho, Program and Policy Lead for the California Department of Public Health's California Connected Contact Tracing Program. Ms. Ho is also the manager of California Notify, California's smartphone-based exposure notification system. Prior to joining CDPH, she was lead public information officer and director of contact tracing for the County of Santa Clara's COVID-19 response. She also served as the primary public health liaison to the County Office of Education and the county superintendents. Ms. Ho has two elementary-age children and serves as the chair of the school site council for their school. We're also extremely happy to have Ms. Shauna Olsen, program advisor for the California Department of Public Health's California Connected Contact Tracing Program. She's with the Strategic Partnership Team, which works to connect CDPH contact tracing expertise with local partners throughout the state, including schools and local health departments. Prior to CDPH, Ms. Olsen worked at the Public Health Institute on programs working to prevent chronic disease injury and adverse childhood experiences. As the parent of two public school students, she's excited to be working with the Safe Schools for All team and helping provide resources to local schools as they return to safe in-person instruction. With us also is Joe Nilesestuen, business architect in Accenture's Salesforce Business Group, and has been serving client teams for over 20 years. But since May of last year, he's partnered with CDPH to lead the functional design of both the Cal Connect platform and the school portal for Outbreak tracking, also known as SPOT. Mr. Nilesestuen has worked to transform the needs of our local health departments into functionality in these platforms. Also, we're super honored to have with us our incredible school administrators, Ms. Cinithia Rodriguez, principal of Vaughn Next Century Learning Center in Pacoima in the County of Los Angeles. Ms. Rodriguez has been in education for 16 years. She taught 3rd and 4th grades, transitioned to instructional coach and grade level coordinator, and is currently in her first year as school site administrator, and I'm sure it's been an exciting one. Both schools that Cinithia has worked in are in her neighborhood where she grew up, which gave her this incredible opportunity to give back to her community. Cinithia received both her bachelor's and master's degrees at Cal State University Northridge and is also a national board certified teacher. And finally, we have with us Ms. Rebecca No, principal at Farragut Elementary School in Culver City. Ms. No is a K-8 school administrator with national board certification and 2 masters in education from the UCLA Teacher Education Program and the UCLA Principal Leadership Institute. Go Bruins! Her teaching experience includes teaching English in the private school setting and abroad in Japan through the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. She taught at Hyde Park Elementary and Now Academy in LAUSD, and before transitioning to administration. So we have an incredible show. Once again, thank you so much for being here. It is my great honor to invite Ms. Evelyn Ho.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you all. I'm really grateful for your partnership because without the partnership, between public health and schools and all of our partners, this COVID response requires all of us to innovate and create together. And so grateful that you are here today so that we can continue to work together. So I want to talk a little bit this afternoon about exposure management and contact tracing in schools. We'll talk through some information about what it means, defining some terms. We'll talk about COVID investigations, what that looks like. What are our goals of what we're trying to achieve with all these activities? Then we'll talk about the roles of schools, school districts, and working with your local public health department, and briefly cover exclusion from work or in-person learning. So there's a lot to cover today, and then we'll be talking more about the resources available to support you all. We want you to know that public health through the state and through your local health department are here to partner with you, to work closely with you to support the safe and effective reopening of in-person instruction. So we're really glad to be partnering with you on this today. So when we talk about COVID-19 investigations and case investigation and contact tracing, it's one tool that we use to prevent communicable diseases, to stop the spread. And there are two basic principles of what we're trying to achieve when we talk about, using small stable groups and then exclusion and making sure that people aren't spreading it. So we have two goals. We're trying to prevent further exposure and further spread of COVID-19 by one, for individuals who have COVID, making sure that they don't expose any more people than have already been exposed. Secondly, and probably the key focus of this, is that individuals who are exposed to COVID-19, making sure that they avoid contact with others. So the idea is that if there is someone who has COVID-19 and is contagious and infectious, they potentially have exposed others. We want to make sure that those people who have been exposed are able to stay away from others so that in the event that they turn up positive from that exposure and they develop COVID-19, that they have had no additional contacts, because then they are a dead end for transmission. If they haven't been around anybody in that period where they may be contagious, normally about 2 days before the onset of symptoms, if they have symptoms, up to 5 to 7 days after. So in that window, if they have not been in contact with other people, that transmission has dead ended there. And that really is the primary goal of overall contact tracing. So when we talk about all the procedures in place for exclusions from school or work, in-person learning or work, it's to ensure that those exposed individuals are no longer potentially transmitting. So let's define a few key terms as we move forward. So the first thing is a case, and we want to be really clear about the distinction between this. So case is language that public health we use all the time. So there's a potential case. It could be someone who has symptoms that are consistent with COVID-19, but they have not yet tested positive. So knowing that someone who has symptoms, then they need to go get a test. There's some delay there before they're able to get a test, and a couple days before they get their result. During that period, they are a potential case, and we want to treat them as a potential case. And then we have confirmed cases. Once that test result comes back, we have confirmed information that this person has tested positive. This person may be with or without symptoms. That's the thing. And as we have seen, a significant proportion of COVID-19 cases present with no symptoms at all. And so it's only the positive test. So you have the case, and then you have the close contact. We define close contact as an individual who's been within 6 feet for a cumulative 15 minutes or more in the span of 24 hours of a case. So you have someone who is a known case and they were around other individuals. In the school setting, this could be staff or students who are in the same small stable group. It may also include people with whom they've interacted outside of school or outside of the small stable group that they may be in. So close contacts are, again, people who've been within that close proximity for 15 minutes or more in that 24 hours. And then what we do for cases who test positive, they go under isolation. So isolation is a practice that's used to separate those infected with COVID-19 from those who aren't infected. So they need to stay at home until it's safe for them to be around others. Again, achieving that goal that they are no longer exposing other people. Typically, the length of isolation for cases for people who've tested positive is 10 days from the first symptom and 24 hours after resolution of fever. So let's say, they have symptoms that start, but 10 days later, they're still running a fever, their isolation may potentially be extended. And if someone does not have symptoms, we use the date that they were tested and they start counting the 10 days from there. So the determination of the period for isolation is really dependent upon the public health case investigators who will support the determination of that length. But that's the general practice, is that individuals who test positive are in isolation for a period of time, normally, typically about 10 days. And then quarantine is the term we use for keeping contacts who've been exposed away from exposing other people. So again, to calculate the quarantine period, it's typically, again, about 10 days from their last exposure with a known case if they have no symptoms. We ask the individuals who've been exposed and are in quarantine that they should get tested for COVID after the 5th day since their exposure to see if they've turned positive yet, and they need to monitor for symptoms while they're in quarantine. The quarantine periods also may be extended by public health for a variety of reasons. One could be the onset of symptoms. The second could be if they continue to be in close contact with other people who are positive. And this sometimes happens in households that we see. There's an individual who's tested positive. The other people in the household are unfortunately unable to stay separate. And so their exposure date actually continues to move while the case is still positive and in isolation. So again, this is an area where public health, your local public health department will determine the length of the quarantine period. So how does this then play into schools and what we're doing here today? So when you think about disease containment, the steps are that we test for COVID, we try to find and identify cases, we do contact tracing, and then we ensure isolation and quarantine. Our local public health departments, your county health departments, and in some areas, your city health department are responsible fundamentally for contact tracing. They may be working with your schools and asking you to participate in supporting those contact tracing efforts, but the local health department retains the authority for contact tracing. So they will interview the case. So they will ask questions about symptom onset, how they're feeling, how they're doing, where they may have been before they turned positive or developed symptoms, who they may have been around, what activities they participated in. There are tools that investigators use in calling and working with individuals who have tested positive to trigger their memories. We ask them to look at their phones of locations they've been, their calendars, to remind them of where they possibly may have been. Your local health department will coordinate closely with your school if there is a case of an individual who reports that they have been on campus or in-person learning during that infectious period. The local public health department will also notify the contacts and try to reach all those close contacts and let them know of their potential exposure and provide them instructions for quarantining. And then they will continue to recommend testing for the individuals who have been exposed. So what's the school's responsibility then? Like we said at the beginning, this is all about partnerships. So schools are responsible to support the rapid identification of cases. So as you get related to in-person learning. So when people have reported that they are positive and you hear about that report, that we ask that you provide that information as quickly and smoothly as possible to your local health department. And we'll go over some mechanisms for doing that. You can also assist by helping to identify the list of exposed contacts. So other students, staff, or colleagues, if they're an employee, who have been in close contact with that individual, whether it's in the small stable group or in other settings at school. And then you'll collaborate with the public health department. The public health department will take that information, begin their case investigation. They may need to circle back with you depending on the number of cases that might be happening. The schools should then exclude the cases and contacts from work or in-person instruction based on the isolation and quarantine guidance provided by your local health department. And then you'll monitor for individual cases, additional cases in your school, and continue to work closely with your local health department to do that. So as I mentioned, the key is the partnership in reporting and sharing of information so that we have information flowing back and forth so that you can do your role of continuing to educate our students, and public health can do their role of ensuring that students are able to attend school, that we are able to minimize transmission both at school and in the community. So the mechanisms for reporting that information between the school and the local health jurisdiction, there could be a variety of mechanisms depending on how your local health department is collecting the information about school students or staff. It could be a line list, which is basically an Excel sheet or like a running list to a table of that information, name, date of birth, and we'll go over that in a minute. We also, for many jurisdictions that are on our statewide contact tracing platform called CalConnect, have a portal, and Joe is going to demo and talk about that in a little bit. It's called SPOT, the School Portal for Outbreak Tracking, where that information can be entered directly online. Your local health department, alternatively, may have also set up their own portal or reporting form. So again, it will really depend on what your local health department has set up as the mechanism. So we ask that you collect the information that you have available through your administrative information of who may have been in close contact and provide that to the local health department. Your local health department will review that line list and may ask additional details where necessary. And then they'll work with you to notify exposed contacts. And it'll be in partnership and in coordination together. Information that schools share with the local health department authority and public health authorities is authorized under FERPA. COVID-19, we are still under an emergency declaration, and cases of COVID-19 in group settings are considered part of that emergency. And so it allows for the reporting and sharing of that information. And so this is a sample of some of the types of information that may need to be shared with your local health department, and they will let you know which sets of information are the most priority pieces of information that should be shared and collected where possible, and which ones may be optional. But there are some core ones: the name of the individual, the age, gender, race, ethnicity, language, contact information. If you have information about their symptoms or when they first became ill, or when their test was done and their lab results. But if you do, the main area also is if they potentially visited more than one campus within your school district or had other mixing that you may know about. And then their educational group, their small stable group, or the pod that they may be in, so that we can work with the other contacts in that group. So finally, I wanted to end a little bit with talking about then what does exclusion from work and in-person instruction look like? Because that's how we're going to be able to slow and minimize spread within the school context. So again, it's following primarily the isolation and quarantine orders set out by your local health department for that individual case or contact. And so knowing that these individuals are generally supposed to stay away from all intermixing, including in the school setting. So your actions are not necessarily to set a quarantine period. Your actions are to set and to reinforce the quarantine or isolation periods as set out by your local health department. So again, to calculate what those times are, there are approximately a minimum of 10 days. There are some situations on a case-by-case basis where there will be some variation from that, and your local health department will work with you on that. But you can plan for generally to start at a minimum of 10 days of exclusion, whether they are a confirmed case, a contact, or if they're symptomatic, but we don't know that they're a case yet, and they don't have exposure. So we, forthcoming, are going to have a decision tree coming out in the couple weeks that will help guide you through this decision-making process about when to send students home or off back to distance learning, and when you can continue to have them on campus. And there are some exceptions related to students or staff who have underlying or other medical diagnoses that may have similar symptoms that may mean that they won't necessarily need to stay home. So finally, collaboration is the key. Your local health department, the state health department, public health department are here as your partners, and we're here to support you. But we need your help with these school investigations to just gather that data as quickly as possible. And we are here to support our local health departments as well. We've supported them with staff that can help with school-based investigations. So they have school specialist staff. They also have outbreak teams. So should you get into have a situation where there are a number of cases that may be connected and there is a suspicion of possible transmission of COVID-19 within your school, your local health department set up with outbreak teams to support you and to minimize additional spread. The local health department will also advise on local implementation of the guidance as well. CDPH issues general guidance, and then the local health departments develop their local practices and implement them there. So we really look to them to partner with you all. And the local health department will provide you with also information on the isolation and quarantine expectations, and will provide the case or contact with that information as well. And CDPH is also providing additional technical support and technical assistance both to local health departments and to schools directly. And Shauna Olsen is actually, in her presentation, is going to talk a little bit more about those resources. So I'll pause there, and I'm looking forward to just having the Q&A with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ho, and thank you for actually pointing out to Ms. Shauna Olsen. So I'm very pleased to invite Ms. Shauna Olsen.
There we go. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Dorian, and thank you, Evelyn, for that great presentation. I'm really excited to be here with you today. As Dr. Dorian mentioned, I'm Shauna Olsen with the California Department of Public Health. I'm also the parent to an 8th grader and a 10th grader who are home all day doing distance learning. So I really feel like I need to start this by saying I'm so grateful to the excellent teachers, administrators, counselors, coaches. They are all working so hard to make this year the best they can for our kids. And I know you guys out there are doing the same for your students. I'm really grateful for all that you're doing. Also really proud of the work that our team has done to bring resources to you as you're being asked to put on this public health hat. So sorry, give me a second. I need to share my screen. There we go. Yeah, you're asked to be put on this public health hat and deal with COVID on your campus. So what we tried to do is put ourselves in your shoes. You're hearing about a COVID-19 case in your school community and your campus, and I'm sure you have some questions. You might be saying, what do I do now? Who do I need to call? How can I confirm that I'm doing the right thing? You know, and schools across the state have just done an amazing job putting together plans and guidance documents, communication templates, all sorts of things. And we recognize that as educators, you guys have a different language than we do over here at Public Health. So what we tried to do is put together some resources to make it a little easier to answer those questions, and also maybe to make it a little easier for you to communicate with your local public health department as you wade into this world of public health. So I'm going to spend most of my time today walking you through a new website that was created for you and contains resources dedicated to contact tracing in schools. So we'll go through some different sections of the website and talk about when you might need to use the different information on each page. I'm also going to briefly touch on the state's Safe Schools for All Hub website, which is a great resource if you haven't seen it yet. I'm also going to talk a little more about the support that CDPH is giving to local health departments. So here's the URL for the Contact Tracing in Schools webpage, and don't worry about writing it down. I'll put it in the chat later. I know it's very long. But as I mentioned, so this website it's really intended to be kind of a one-stop shop for contact tracing resources for schools. So the target audience is not only school administrators, but we also were really thinking about school office managers, school counselors, school staff, really anyone that's working with parents that might be fielding those phone calls, and also anyone who might be taking a phone call or initiating one with the local health department when there's a COVID-19 case in your school community. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the page and show you the different parts of it. So it starts with a description of contact tracing, what it is, when it would happen, and how you might be asked to help, although Evelyn really covered a lot of that already. But then as you scroll down, the first section is resources for schools. So we start with a link to the TA portal. There's some information about reporting cases, and then also a link to the virtual training academy. So since Evelyn talked a little bit about case reporting, and Joe's going to talk a lot more about SPOT and case reporting as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and skip right to the TA portal. So I'll show you what that looks like. And this link, the technical assistance page, it's actually part of the Safe Schools for All hub. And this is where you would go if you have a question for the Safe Schools for All team. So these are state people that are dedicated to answering your questions on all these different topics. But I want to say that even if you don't have a TA request, this page is full of informative links that have been curated for you. So I would definitely recommend checking it out, even if you don't have a TA request. But this is where you would go to initiate that process if you do have a question or need to get in touch with the state's Safe Schools for All team. So next up is the Virtual Training Academy. And congratulations, you guys are all here, part of the Virtual Training Academy already. That is the team that has put on this webinar. So the VTA page has information about upcoming webinars and trainings for you, school administrators and staff, but they also have information about training for local health departments that are working with schools. And then at the bottom of the page, there's a library of the previously recorded webinars. So for example, this webinar today is the third in the series of principles and practices for safe schools. So if you missed the first two, I would definitely recommend you checking out this page and listening to those other two recordings. So if you scroll down a little bit further, the second line of the resource section has links to the School Liaison Toolkit, which should hopefully be coming soon in the coming weeks. Right now has links to a resource library and a school specialist directory. Evelyn showed you a draft of the decision tree, which is one component of the School Liaison Toolkit, but it also has a key term section, which should help better understand public health jargon and also acronyms, which we here at Public Health are really fond of, as well as there's a principal contact form, so that when you as a school site have identified your school specialist at the health department, it can be printed and put out, posted at your school site. So that way, if the primary person that is contacting the health department, your primary school COVID liaison, is out for the day or is in a meeting, anyone else in the office has really easy access to that information. So next I'm going to show you the school resource library, which is a sampling of documents that local schools are using across the state. So this is by no means an exhaustive list. We just wanted to show some examples from a variety of schools. We have some from small districts, from large districts, from urban and rural, up and down the state of California. Really so that if you're looking to create something, some parent communication, there's some great school dashboards. You don't have to start from scratch. This just gives you some ideas of things that are happening in other schools. We're adding to this list regularly and updating it. So if you have a favorite resource, we would love to hear from you. This is our contact information, which I'll also put in the chat afterwards. But that's the email for the contact tracing in schools technical assistance team. And we would love to see some additions to these resources. So next, this last link is the school specialist directory. So each health department in the state, including the city jurisdictions as well as all of the counties, identified the best way for local schools to get in touch with them with any school-related questions and also for case reporting. So as you can see, some gave us an email address, some gave us a phone number, and if there's a hyperlink, they gave us a website too. So this is just the top part of the page, but there's information for all of the different local health jurisdictions, which we hope is really helpful for you and your staff as you're trying to figure out who to get in touch with at the health department. So keep in mind, there's also the state's technical assistance portal with lots of information and that request form. So if you need help interpreting anything, or if you need help getting in touch with your local health department, that's a great place to go for that information. Now, this is the website for the Safe Schools for All Hub. Now, if you haven't seen it yet, really make sure to check this out. This is where you go for all things COVID-19 and schools. There's a new FAQ section that answers some frequently asked questions about the new school guidance, which is really helpful. There's also, it's called a crosswalk between the CDC guidance as well as the CDPH guidance, talking about what are the similarities and differences between those two things. The site has information about COVID testing and vaccines specifically for school populations. I mentioned the TA portal already. There's lots of good stuff on this website, so be sure to check it out if you haven't seen it yet. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about what the state is doing to support your local health departments as they work with schools. So you might not be aware that there have been actually thousands of state employees who have been trained to do case investigation and contact tracing. They've been deployed to work with their local health departments, and many of them have been trained as school specialists. So those might be people that you're working with in your local departments. The state provides this training as well as technology that you'll learn about a little more about in a few minutes. And then we also are providing technical assistance to health departments as well as to schools. But specifically, there's a team that's working just with the health departments to help interpret guidance, answer questions, all sorts of things. And we're also developing a contact tracing in schools webpage that's just for your local health department counterparts. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all that you're doing to teach our children and keep them safe. These are the URLs for the websites that I mentioned, and also the contact information for the contact tracing in schools team. And with that, I'll turn it back to Dr. Dorian.
Thank you so much, Ms. Olsen, for your passion, your care, and for the amount of work that you've been doing on this school facing. You know, I know that so much has gone into this, and it's just really incredible and very much appreciated. So thank you so much. And now over to Mr. Joe Nilesestuen.
Thank you, Dr. Dorian, and thanks everyone for having me. I couldn't be more thrilled to follow Evelyn and Shauna. What a great segue into a few minutes just to describe the school portal for outbreak tracking and the work that we've been doing since October on this part of the sort of Cal-connected portfolio. So I'm going to talk about three things today. You know, what is SPOT and why do we have it? I'm going to explain at a really high level very quickly what a couple of the key components of it are, and then just remind everyone what it means to you and how you may end up using this to interact with your local health departments. So first of all, why SPOT? Why the school portal for outbreak tracking? So we've had the CalConnect platform going back to early May. It's enabling our case investigators, contact tracers, and all the great work of contact tracing that's done by all of the local health departments in the state of California. And we discovered a need to help the local health departments get information faster from schools where they have potential exposures, positive COVID cases, or potentially an outbreak. And some health departments have ways of doing that already and others didn't. And we really wanted something that was secure and quick and was available immediately when the school had that exposure that didn't require a lot of training or anything like that. It needed to be easy, simple, in a way to get that information to the local health departments. And so SPOT at its most basic form, it's a way for you to get data when you need to that local health department. And it's a tool in all of the things that we have to help safely reopen schools. And so I've really been thrilled to be a part of it since its inception. So what is SPOT? What is the school portal? It really consists of two things. Some of the features are new as of this week, actually, including the SPOT intake form. And this is a way, there's a public website that's available now that if you go to that site and enter in and choose the local health department or the county that you are, that your school is in, that you may have the opportunity to enter in the basic information about the location, your contact info, and to report that you may have a COVID-19 exposure or a case that's shown up at your school. And so that's the first key component, to make that initial report to the local health department. The second piece of that is where we create case and contact records, and Evelyn talked about what a case and a contact are. It's really just about the people, the students or staff that may have been exposed or who are positive for COVID. And we need some details about that so that information can get into our California Connected platform. And so the work of contact tracing can be done with the support of the local health department. So just a little bit of detail about what each of those components are. So first, this spot intake form, as I mentioned, it is a website that will be potentially made available to you by your local health department that you'll be able to go to. Some representative from the school, maybe that's a school nurse or another administrator who's sort of tasked with doing this type of reporting. What they'll be able to do is provide the local health department with basic information. What's the school, what's the location, and then some details about that exposure, how many people were involved, what are the dates, what part of the school was it in, and then who should the health department contact and potentially enable with a login for the second part of this, which is our logged in spot interface, where you will be registered by your local health department to actually log into the platform and then begin to provide more detailed information about those people, those students or staff who may be cases or contacts that were exposed as part of this exposure at your school. And so the things that are collected in this tool are things like name and contact info of the students and staff, their affiliation with the school, demographic information about the exposure and potential systems, and even test results if you happen to have them at that point. And so as a logged in user, you'll be able to provide this through what is effectively an online form. And just because of time, we won't demo any of that today, but if you imagine filling out your Amazon order form, filling out this online form is meant to be just as intuitive as anything that we do as consumers or users of the internet and online forms today. Some fields are required, they're marked with asterisks, but it's really meant to be intuitive once you get logged in, and to make this process as easy as it can be for those at the schools that are tasked with providing this reporting, and also make it available to you at the time that you need it without a need for a lot of training. And for this to work and to be useful to you and to the local health departments, we had to meet all of those goals. And so what does this mean to you? So like I mentioned a minute ago, that spot is really intended to be sort of ad hoc, as needed. When you have a potential exposure or outbreak, your health department's going to provide what you need to know about potentially going to spot. Some health departments are using it, some aren't. There's nothing you need to do ahead of time to register or to do any training. It's going to be easy for you to use, and you'll get all the information you need from your local health department. If you have any questions, or when you have an exposure and you haven't been provided any of this, Shauna provided some of that contact info, the local health department directory. Those same contacts are going to be able to provide to you the information you need to have to access Spot, to go to the link to make any sort of reporting, and then to be able to log in, where you'll be able to provide that information about students and staff, and ultimately do some of the other things that Spot can, such as extract some of that data in a report if you need it. We've got some basic dashboards and some other things that are meant to be useful to you as the schools, in addition to being a way to provide that information safely, securely, and quickly to your local health department. And so with that, I'll go back to you, Dr. Dorian. Thanks for having me, and look for more information on the school portal for outbreak tracking and Spot from your local health departments in the near future.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I think it's really important to realize that, as you were saying, maybe everybody is not on Spot, but the idea and the thinking behind it also follows whether they're going to do a line list, whether they're going to do some other portal on the web, depending on what their local health jurisdiction does. And I think it's important for all of us to know across the state, what are these platforms that can be available to us. So thank you so much. And now it's my pleasure to turn over the virtual podium to our education partners. So if we can all turn on our videos, we will start a round of poignant questions, beginning with, there we are, Ms. Rodriguez. Ms. Rodriguez.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. So one question that keeps coming up for us is, when dealing with students that are coming from the same home, if one of the students is exposed to COVID or showing signs of COVID, should the whole family be asked to quarantine, or is it just the one child?
Thanks, Ms. Rodriguez, for that question. I'll take that. So when we think about the cases and contexts as we previously described and what the goals are, so the individual, the child who has been exposed is considered a contact. But if no one else in the household has been exposed, so that child had an individual interaction with a case, but the rest of the household did not, we do not consider the rest of the household exposed or a contact. So only that child needs to quarantine, and your local health department will only have given quarantine instructions to that individual child. Now, should that child eventually either develop symptoms or test positive, then the other members of the household are then considered contacts. And so siblings and other family members will then also be quarantining. And then at that point, that's when they would be excluded from in-person learning.
Thank you so much for that, Evelyn. And I think, again, it comes back to that idea that you always do that if you are exposed to a case, right? Not exposure to another contact. So really thinking about that for school administrators, kind of having that definition down strong makes it a little easier for us to know as we're navigating when we have somebody in front of us and how we go through that decision tree that we were talking about. Ms.
Can I add one more? Can I add a comment?
Absolutely.
The other part of that question, I realize that's a complexity, a wrinkle, is around if another household member, a sibling, for example, has symptoms. So they are not necessarily have not been exposed, but they have symptoms. So the decision tree that we're going to be putting out shortly in the next couple of weeks, we'll walk through that. So that's a kind of different entry point. So it's an individual who has symptoms, but no known exposure. If their symptoms are consistent with COVID and not part of any underlying pre-existing medical condition, then we do have guidance that they should be excluded until they can get tested. And certainly if they have a fever, because we don't, in general, don't want individuals with fever coming into mixed settings, regardless of whether it's COVID or any other illness. And you guys are well accustomed to working with students with fever. And so in that regard, if they have a fever, they certainly should not come to school. But it's a kind of a different pathway and not necessarily tied to the potential that a family member or household member is a contact. So it's important to separate out the nuances, and that decision tree will really help you guide through that process, and your local health department is there to support you too on the case-by-case basis.
Great, thank you. And I think, again, coming back, it's important to take that decision tree and just walk through it with that understanding of what each one of those definitions are. Because I too, today we opened our second grade, so we're going through this right now and sort of figuring out to make sure I really understand the decision tree when it's in front of me and what I need to do. So Ms. No, sorry, I had interrupted you. So can you please ask your question?
Thank you. I'm looking forward to getting the decision tree. And my question is related to Cynthia's question. It's if a cohort has a positive case, would we quarantine everyone in the family as well as the sibling and the cohorts of the siblings? How would we message that exposure?
That's a great question. So I'll dive into that too. So it's similar to what we just explained, right? So if there's an individual who is a positive case and they're in a cohort. So first, the individuals in the cohort or that small stable group, depending on contact and if they've been able to manage the degree of contact, then they would be recommended by the local health department that they should generally be quarantining and then excluded from school. Now, the siblings or family members of that case, they would be considered household contacts outside of the school setting. And the health department would have told them that they also need to quarantine. But as in that first example, because they are a contact, we're not as concerned about the cohort or small stable group members with the contacts, those other siblings that aren't the index case. So really it only extends as far as kind of that first degree of close contacts. That's really how we think about it. So we're concerned about cases, we're concerned about contacts, and until a contact becomes a case, we're less concerned about that second layer of contacts. So the focus really is on cases and contacts.
Great, thank you so much. Ms. Rodriguez, I believe you had another question.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned fevers. So I wanted to ask around the idea of taking temperatures of the students when they're coming onto campus. How effective is that in perhaps catching a student that could possibly have COVID prior to entering the school? How effective is temperature taking, basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we know that in many settings and different, businesses that are open or workplaces, temperature screening has been used initially. We'd have early, data that shows that, we know a lot of, especially the younger children tend to not have symptoms. More of them tend to not have symptoms. And the guidance from CDPH is that symptom monitoring should be happening at home by the parents. So they should be checking for fevers at home, certainly, and any other symptoms, and then reporting that into the school. And so that screening should hopefully already be happening on a family by family or household by household basis, and then reported. We know that there may be individuals because fevers, not all children are going to have our students or even adults will have fevers. And so it may pick up some cases. And so really it's a matter of making sure that everyone is monitoring for symptoms at home and certainly reporting it. And that's really the key. And then if you, for operationalizing that at school is really about how do you communicate about that symptom monitoring from home.
Well, I think that's an important question and something that we all think about, because that's a very big resource intensive piece to take sort of the temperature every day and think about it. But there probably also is a messaging piece, right? If we don't take the temperature, does the community understand that we're actually doing all of the mitigation sort of strategies that we need to do as we're doing it? So I think it's important, again, and I love that question, just as administrators to understand, where do we put our resources in trying to think about, right, that Swiss cheese or that mitigation strategies, and is this the best place? And I think part of it comes back down to every individual school understanding what they have in sense of resources and time. How long does it take for you to be able to do that before you get everybody into class and thinking about it? So thank you so much. Ms. No, I think you had another question.
Yeah, that communication piece is always on my mind, especially with things like contact tracing. So my question is about when there's a case of COVID, how do we both contact trace and communicate efficiently and effectively to all stakeholders while maintaining the confidentiality of the person who contracted COVID?
I'll put on my former PIO hat and think through this with you all. That's a great question. And so really what we are looking for, the public health side, the information that you're collecting on contacts, first of all, is information that's known to you kind of administratively, right? So you know who's already in a small stable group or in some shared space. There may be a layer of additional investigating. But the goal in terms of communication is to provide, as always, in all kind of risk communication, as being as transparent as possible without divulging any identifying information, right? So you're able to share what you do know, that there was a student or a staff who, was a case, and these actions have been taken. Those are the elements that help to reinforce that to your parent and school communities, that you are taking every possible action and working closely with local health department to make sure that there isn't additional spread from there. And so it's really a matter of working with the local health department. They can do additional investigations so that it's not a burden upon the schools to be really inquiring into, every after school activity or the nuances of carpools and things like that. Unless you're already aware of those things, the health department can do that level of investigation. And they are trained to be able to do that investigation without disclosing the identity of the individual case. And then on the communication side, providing the general messaging that you can of both what happened, what the event was, and what actions have since been taken, and what parents and families should expect from there.
And is the
question? I was gonna say, can I jump in real quick to?
Yeah, absolutely.
As just a reminder, the school resource library that I showed you guys today has some examples of communications that are sent home with parents that can maybe be a starting point for you. There's also some sample letters at the end of CDPH's consolidated school guidance. So that can give you some ideas of just general communication home with parents.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say, I think, first of all, we also, if you go to the Virtual Training Academy button there, we have a few trainings coming up for school administrators on risk communication. So risk communication during COVID, but also sort of looking at it from a larger umbrella. But also, I think one of the things I've noticed in communicating is really this idea of privacy, right? And FERPA, and sort of what does that look like where parents are, can our information be shared, et cetera. And I don't know, Ms. Ho, if you want to talk a little bit more about sort of that. I know you touched on it, but maybe that's an important thing for school administrators to feel confident in being able to share the information.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, that line of FERPA and HIPAA and all the protections that are in place, that's historically been, a part of the challenge of, as we coordinate between communicable diseases in schools and what can be shared and exchanged. And recognizing that all of us are committed to protecting the privacy of students, of cases, of contacts, that is tantamount in all the work that we do. So as I mentioned before, FERPA does authorize the sharing of protected information with a local public health authority for the purposes of stopping the spread of communicable diseases. And in particular with COVID-19, since March 4th, 2020, we have been under an emergency declaration, and that actually gives more allowances under FERPA to be able to share information as part of that emergency declaration as well. And knowing that on the public health side, that all information is protected under HIPAA, and then so that direct communication and the portals that are being set up are all secure channels for data exchange. And we try to really keep it to the minimum amount of information that's shared that's necessary. So as we determined, those list of fields, each local health department is looking at what's the minimum necessary amount of information that we need to exchange to be able to intervene. So we're really trying to avoid sharing a lot of information beyond that so that you can protect the privacy of your students, and then we can protect their privacy on the other end when we're doing additional investigation as well.
That's great, thank you. And I think Ms. No, you have one last question if I'm...
Yeah, and this is probably on the minds of all principals as the rules keep changing. And so with constantly changing updates to protocols and procedures, how do we keep our staff and community abreast of the changes without making things confusing?
That's a great question. I can take that one. And you're absolutely right. There are multiple sources of information. They're not always updated on the same timeline because there's so much new research and findings getting released. So one of the things that we're trying to do on the state side, this new Safe Schools for All hub really should streamline this and serve as a portal for all of the most current guidance. So we're sticking to the guidance that's on the hub because that guidance will hold until it is officially updated. And when it's officially updated, it will be officially updated on the hub. So that's a great place to go. There's a what's new section on the hub. So at the very top, there's those different cards that has information. So that's a good place to go. We also talked about the FAQs that are on the hub, the frequently asked questions, and those are specific related to the guidance. And again, we mentioned the technical assistance portal. That's another great place to go if you have questions and you want an answer from the Safe Schools for All team. For a school audience, continue attending these webinars. This is where you're going to get the most up-to-date information, the principal practices for safe schools. And then for the local health departments, there's a weekly COVID-19, it's called the Local Public Health School Leadership and Liaison Group, where the Safe Schools for All team is leading a conversation and trying to get out the most up-to-date information as possible.
Thank you so much.
And I think that's really important. I mean, the concept of sort of this hub, that's what the state was thinking. Where can we have all of our schools go? Because me too, as an administrator, you're everywhere, right? Trying to figure out, and sometimes not even understanding the science behind it. And so trying to do a crosswalk between them is difficult, which is actually one of the things that's even on that site where they took the new CDC guidance and the state guidance and they crosswalked it so that we have a better understanding of how to be able to then apply that to each and every one of our schools and what that means. But one thing also just to keep in mind is we also, all of us in our schools, are within a local health jurisdiction. So we need to just also understand if there's any additional guidance from our local health jurisdiction in what we need to do based off of sort of that state guidance and how to move forward. So we have a few minutes left, very, very few minutes. So I'm going to ask a few questions that were given to us previously or in the Q&A today. I think it just comes back, it just reiterates one of the things that we keep hearing. I know we've mentioned it a few times, but it's this idea of when do I need to report to my local health department? Like, when is it that I find out, and then when and how do I actually then report to my public health department?
That's a great question. So if you do hear whether you are supporting any testing that might be happening at your school and you're being made aware of results through school-based testing, or if a family is reporting in that a student or a staff member is reporting in that they have tested positive, employees are required in California to report positive results to their employers. And so if you're hearing that, that you can report that into your local health department. One thing of note is that all positive test results are already reported to your local health department through our typical reporting mechanisms. Now, the fact when you report that into your local health department, it helps make the connection that this individual may have worked or attended in-person learning on campus, and there's additional kind of school-based work, that investigation that should happen and should follow. All positive results are already reported to your local health department first through automatic lab reporting systems. And then from there, as you report in that information, the real key of where we really need that partnership from you all is to identify who may have been exposed to that individual on your school campuses. And so that's really the partnership. The case information we'll have, but if you already know it as well, it helps to foster that connection more quickly. It doesn't require public health to wait to have to call, do the investigation, find out what school they went to, and have a few days lag if you also know on the other side and can close that loop of communication quickly.
And the understanding is that we should try and do that as quickly as possible, right? And basically through those systems. So what is the difference then between reporting a case and then an outbreak in a school? So what is that? Where are sort of the lines of distinction there for schools? And what do we have to think about when we hear that word outbreak?
Outbreak. I know that's the scary word, right? And so, there's movies, it's called Outbreak. And so when we think about an outbreak is defined as 3 or more cases within 14 days where we know that there's an epidemiological connection. So having 3 cases that are separate because they have other household members who were positive, and then they also then tested positive, but 3 separate members who didn't cross paths in on-campus learning, have no other connection within the physical connection within the school, would not be considered an outbreak. So again, it's 3 or more cases that have some sort of connection. Now, this is where it's the public health department's role to really support you all in doing this, to identify where there are linkages. So you can help, when you help and provide that information of who else was in a small stable group, or did they share recess time and happen to have some playground time at the same time, things like that. That is information that helps us public health make those connections, that they may be related to each other and may be associated with in-school transmission versus community transmission and transmission that's happening elsewhere. And of course, please know that if you were to get to that point of having an outbreak, we not only have school specialists and local health departments that are there to work with you on the case-by-case basis. Local health departments also have entire outbreak investigation teams that are set up specifically for when we start seeing significant amounts of spread within that setting. And so they are really there not only to just do contact tracing, but then can support infection control and other interventions to help you stop that spread within your school and give you a guidance on which parts maybe do you expand, what's being excluded, what parts are closing, and we'll give you the guidance on how to do that.
And as an administrator, I need guidance, right? And so really thinking about that I am an educator, right? Yep. Public health needs to really help me think about that. So we're already coming to the end. We have 1 minute left. So I want to thank all of you for being here today and for sharing your valuable time with us. Thank you very much to our esteemed panelists for their wisdom, their insight, this amazing conversation. As I mentioned in the beginning of our webinar, today was just the 3rd one in a series of webinars we will be hosting. All of them are to provide school administrators with a forum to dialogue and work with our subject matter experts in order to better understand implementation of the guidance, taking into account the specific needs and realities within our schools. Our next webinar will be next Thursday, March 4th from 4 to 5, and it will focus on school-based testing. We also have the risk communication trainings coming up on the 26th of this month, which is tomorrow, Friday. But we also have one Friday on March 12th. So if you go to that, I think we put the links in there. Again, I'm super grateful for all of you today. Thank you for being here and see you all next week.